Well, good afternoon. And today I have a question for you. Let's start out with, what is your premise? Yeah, that's not a mistake. That's exactly what I want to ask you. This is Progressive Plan Inc. Quick tip number 3. And I'm going to ask you again, what is your turnaround event premise? Now, the reason I want to talk to you about event premise is because I'm noticing a trend of event premises being dealt with as checkbox exercises. So let's backtrack a little bit. I don't personally know of a legitimate turnaround process that does not include creating a turnaround event premise. Usually within the first half a dozen asks of your process, you will be asked to produce a turnaround event process. Well, I want to go a little bit more than that. Your turnaround process, depending on which one you've developed or which one you purchased, will have somewhere between 300 and say 600-ish line items. Each line item will be an activity. Each of those activities compound to build up and complete your master milestone schedule. Amongst those activities, more or less predictably, 20% of them will be classed as key deliverables. Whether you use that exact term or not, they will in fact be your key deliverables. And here's the thing I want to ask everybody to try to remember about key deliverables. If you complete those 20% approximately of activities, which are your key deliverables, it is predictable that you will deliver 80% of your turnaround process's promise on both schedule and cost. So key deliverables are pretty important, way too important to be turning into checkbox exercises. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and say that there is nothing on a modern turnaround management process which should ever be allowed to be checkboxed. But one of the things that we need the senior management team and the guys of the steering team, and more importantly, the senior leadership team and the guys of the strategy team, we need them paying attention to these deliverables and making sure that they are actually delivered. So let's just make sure everybody understands what a premise is first. A premise is simply an idea or a theory on which a statement or action is based. In this case, the action that we're concerned about is our actual event. And the premise is going to keep our scope and event defined so that we can make our intended budget and schedule. Okay, let's do an example. Let's say that you're working in an end-of-life facility. I've done that. I've done turnarounds in end-of-life facilities. And typically in an end-of-life facility, your turnaround premise is going to say something. Your premise is going to be really short. It's going to say something pretty poignant like, we will only do the regulatory-driven work that absolutely requires a shutdown to complete. That's it. That would be a pretty typical premise in an end-of-life facility. What would be surprising for a team that came in to help with readiness assessment or something like that is to then find a whole bunch of work in the scope of work that does not fit that very narrow premise. And this is what I mean by accountability at the strategy team level. If the strategy team has signed off on a premise that says we're only doing this regulatory work, then why is this other work in the list? Okay. Same token, premises can be built up. Maybe we're in more prosperous times. I'm predicting we're heading into more prosperous times in our industry. And in more prosperous times, you might have other add-ons. There might be 2 or 3 projects that have been pre-approved. They would be included in the premise. Now, the point here is partly what's in the premise, but the bigger point I want to make, if the work that's being talked about at this week's turnaround management meeting is not in any way in the premise, then why are we wasting the team's time talking about it? Your premise is one of your number 1 key deliverable documents. It is not a checkbox exercise. The premise needs to be put together extremely carefully. The premise needs to be signed off on by the turnaround team, by the steering team, and most importantly, by the strategy team. It is the steering team and the strategy team's accountability to ensure that the entire group involved with turnaround sticks to the letter of the turnaround premise. It's not a checkbox exercise. Thank you so much for your time. This has been Progressive Plan. Quick tip. Number 3, see you next week.